Time had not been kind to the room. Dust rested on the floor like a thin reminder of everything left undone, and the fading afternoon light slipped through cracked blinds in narrow, hesitant lines. The air held a quiet stillness, an old, patient silence that felt almost conscious. It was here, in this dim, forgotten space on the edge of a small Arkansas town, that investigators once stood over a case that never found its ending. Now, 30 years later, the door creaked open again, and the past exhaled into the present, slow and cold. The scene hadn't been preserved for nostalgia. It had simply been left behind when the investigation stalled. The walls still held faint discolorations where evidence markers had once clung. A single overturned chair remained in the far corner, its plastic surface dulled by time. And on the floor, an outline, faint, barely visible, suggested the position where a young woman had been found in 1993. Her name was Elara Hastings, age 27, a local librarian with a quiet life and few known complications. The kind of person whose absence feels strangely heavy, precisely because she had asked for so little from the world. Investigator Cole Maren stepped inside with the deliberate pace of someone returning to a place he had tried hard to forget. His breath formed a soft cloud in the cold air. He paused just beyond the threshold, allowing the silence to settle around him like a reprimand. This wasn't just a room. It was a reminder of a mistake, his mistake. He had been a junior officer then, inexperienced but eager, and though he had followed procedure, something had slipped through his hands. Something small. Something that mattered. Cole adjusted the thin leather notebook in his grip, its edges worn smooth by years of handling. He didn't speak. He simply absorbed the room, letting memory climb out of its long sleep. The hum of an old ceiling fan, long broken, seemed to echo faintly in his mind. The scent of paper and old wood returned. Dust brushed against the cuffs of his coat. Everything here seemed fragile, as though one loud sound could cause the entire past to collapse into fragments. Elara Hastings had been discovered early on a gray November morning. A neighbor, concerned that her front door was half open, had stepped inside and found the room much like this, silent, disordered, wrong. The initial investigation had been thorough but directionless. No forced entry, no clear struggle. No obvious motive. The case had slowly cooled until it was frozen entirely, boxed and filed among other unresolved tragedies. Cole walked deeper into the room, his footsteps soft, cautious. He reached the center, where that faint outline remained like a whisper. He knelt, not out of ritual, but from a simple need to look again at the place where Elara's life had halted. He remembered the photograph taken from this angle, the one that had resurfaced in his mind far too often. He drew a slow breath. Inhale, exhale, controlled. The weight of the moment pressed against him, steady and familiar. There had been no sign of panic on Elara's face in the original photos. That detail had always unsettled him. It suggested trust. Suggested that the person who entered her home that night had been welcomed, or at least not feared. A floorboard shifted faintly under his knee. The room creaked, or perhaps he imagined it. His heart tapped a subtle rhythm against his ribs, not frantic but aware. The past had a sound too, if one listened closely enough. Cole stood again, scanning the walls, the corners, the empty shelves. He wasn't looking for clues, those had been collected long ago. He was looking for clarity, something he might have missed. The case file had outlined each movement, each assumption, each narrow pursuit, and yet none had led anywhere meaningful. He wiped a hand across a dusty tabletop. A thin line appeared beneath his fingers, exposing untouched wood. It reminded him of the days following the original investigation, when he had lingered here too long, trying to understand what the room refused to reveal. Elara's family had moved away soon after the case went cold. Her parents overwhelmed. her younger brother silent. The town had absorbed the tragedy and eventually buried it under new concerns: storms, elections, school renovations. But Cole never managed to let it rest. Now he stood here again, older, slower, but more precise in his thinking. The air felt heavy with what had been left unsolved. He stepped toward the back wall where a small nail protruded, once holding a framed photograph that had been removed as evidence. He remembered that picture: Elara standing in front of the library, smiling faintly, her hair pulled back loosely. A friend had taken the photo, though no one could recall exactly when. A detail that had seemed unimportant at the time. A soft, nearly imperceptible sound snapped Cole's attention, paper shifting. He turned toward the source, the small cabinet near the window. One drawer sat slightly ajar, though he didn't recall it being open when he entered. He approached with careful steps, unsure whether the movement had been caused by him disturbing the floor or simply the building settling. He touched the drawer. It gave slightly, as if nudged from within by the push of time. Inside were remnants, old dust, a few curled papers likely forgotten by the original cleanup team. Nothing significant, but the movement, however minor, disrupted the stillness. Cole slid the drawer shut again. The quiet returned. His gaze swept the room once more. He thought of Elara, her calm presence, described consistently by those who knew her. A person anchored to routine, to simplicity. Someone whose life should never have been complicated by violence. He closed his eyes for a moment. Then he left the room exactly as he had found it. He would return tomorrow, he knew. The case was open again. The past had called him back. 2. Case reopens due to discovery of new crucial evidence. 1,000 words. The file had been dormant for decades, tucked deep within a steel cabinet at the county evidence facility. It was only reopened because of an administrative transfer, routine, harmless, the sort of bureaucratic shuffle no one notices. Except this time something surfaced. A mislabeled envelope. Thin, light, unassuming. Its discovery had been accidental. A clerk sorting archived materials had found it wedged between two unrelated case files. The handwriting on the front had faded almost to invisibility, but a faint line remained. Hastings, Sup. Supplemental. Additional evidence that had never been logged. Cole received the call early in the morning. The message was brief, hesitant, almost uncertain. We found something. Might belong to the Hastings case. You should probably take a look. The envelope now rested on Cole's desk, the paper brittle beneath his fingertips. He sat in his small office, blinds partially drawn, the muted sunlight creating narrow stripes across the room. His breath felt steady, but the air carried a subtle weight, as though the investigation, long dormant, had stirred awake. He opened the envelope carefully. Inside were 3 items. 1. A photograph. 2. A short written note. 3. A receipt with a date circled. Nothing dramatic, nothing that seemed capable of breaking open a cold case. But Cole studied each item with the meticulous patience he had developed over years of investigative work. The photograph was slightly blurred, its edges softened by time. It showed Elara standing beside a mailbox outside her home. She wasn't smiling. She looked contemplative, almost troubled. The angle suggested it was taken without her noticing. The timestamp on the back read October 28, 1993, 4 days before she was found. Cole held the photo longer than necessary, searching her expression. It wasn't fear. It wasn't alarm. Just a subtle tension barely visible, something internal. Next, he unfolded the note. The handwriting was neat, careful. It read, "Check the last return. Someone didn't follow instructions. No signature, no context, no indication of who had written it. Cole's mind moved through the possibilities: colleagues, acquaintances, someone from the library. The phrasing resembled procedural language, perhaps referring to library operations, but it could also imply something else entirely: a return, an exchange, a pattern broken. Finally, the receipt. A simple hardware store slip, timestamped October 30, 1993, with a single item purchased, a small metal latch. The date was circled in red ink. Cole leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. The three pieces didn't align clearly, but they pointed somewhere, toward a detail missed, a misstep, something quiet but meaningful. He placed the photograph beside the note. Elara's expression, combined with the phrase "last return," gave him a direction, subtle but real. He reopened the original case file, spreading its contents across his desk. The sound of old paper brushing against itself filled the room, an almost nostalgic whisper. Reports, interviews, scene diagrams, observations made by younger versions of officers who had since retired. Cole sifted through them with deliberate care. He found the mention of a library return box, but only in passing, a detail noted and dismissed. Elara had worked late that final evening, sorting materials after closing. She was last seen leaving the library alone, carrying a small bag of returned books. Cole read the line again. His pulse ticked once sharply. Books. Returns. Instructions not followed. Someone didn't do what they were supposed to. He aligned the receipt with the timeline. October 30th, the day before she was found. Someone had purchased a latch. For what purpose? A repair, a replacement, something to secure or hide. The photograph, note, and receipt formed the first coherent thread the case had seen in years. Cole took a quiet breath. The room felt colder now, though the temperature hadn't changed. The past wasn't just echoing, it was revealing itself. He gathered the items carefully, placing them into a new evidence folder. The case was officially reopened. 3 investigator examines, past reports to identify overlooked details. 1,000 words. Cole spread the documents across a larger table in the records room, where the hum of fluorescent lights blended with the quiet turning of pages. Dust drifted in slow spirals whenever he moved a file, giving the air a muted texture. He worked methodically, his movements controlled, his thoughts precise. He began with the earliest interview, the neighbor who found Elara's door open. Door wasn't cracked before, the neighbor had said, voice documented as uncertain. But that morning, something felt off. Cole noted the phrasing again, felt, not observed, felt. An instinctive detail, not a reliable one, but instincts often carried truths people couldn't articulate. He moved on. The librarian who last saw Elara had described her as quiet, focused, maybe tired. Nothing unusual, nothing concerning. But the tone written in the report sounded dismissive, as though the interviewer had not pressed further. Cole flipped through the pages, absorbing the rhythm of the investigation as it once was, swift, procedural but lacking patience. He found himself returning to a single overlooked detail, the return box behind the library. It had been mentioned twice, dismissed both times, but now felt central. One officer had noted that the return box showed signs of recent use and minor wear. Another report described a small scuff near the lock, but dismissed it as routine damage. Cole set those pages aside, marking them with a small red tab. He next examined the inventory list. One item stood out, a missing key, not Elara's house key that had been found on her table. This key belonged to something else, something unspecified. He flipped back. A note from Elara's coworker mentioned that she often carried a small, separate key on a thin chain inside her work bag. Probably for her desk drawer, the coworker had guessed, but no desk drawer had been found locked. Nothing at home required such a key. It had never been accounted for. Cole underlined the note. The missing key. The scuffed return box. The note, someone didn't follow instructions. The receipt for the latch. Pieces were forming a shape. Cole rubbed the bridge of his nose, grounding himself. The hum of the lights seemed louder now. The air tasted slightly metallic, old wiring, dust, and something else he couldn't name. He closed the original folder and opened a smaller supplemental file. It contained only a handful of items, a list of names, a map of the library, a timeline. He traced Elara's known movements on the final evening. 6:07 p.m., Elara closes the library. 6:14 p.m., locks main entrance. 6:22 p.m., seen carrying return bag. 6:28 p.m., last recorded sighting near her mailbox. The timestamp on the photograph matched that final location. Cole stared at the photograph again. Elara standing still, expression tight, looking not directly at the camera but past it towards something or someone nearby. Cole's breath slowed. A shadow in the background, barely visible, suggested the photographer had not been alone. He leaned closer. Not a figure, not a shape, just a faint distortion, but enough to imply proximity. Someone had been near her mailbox that night. Someone who watched her unnoticed. Someone she might have trusted. Cole sat back silent. The past had waited long enough. The reopening of the case did not begin with noise. It began with quiet steps, calls made softly, interviews requested without attention, the kind of slow, deliberate process that keeps a fragile truth from retreating again. Cole's approach was measured. He compiled a list of individuals connected to Elara in the weeks leading to her final day. Some had been interviewed in 1993, others only mentioned indirectly, their names hovering on the edges of earlier reports. He started with Darren Holt, a former coworker at the library. Back then, he had been 24, reserved, polite, and noticeably nervous during his initial interview. The report described him as cooperative but evasive on personal questions. Cole read the line several times. Nervousness alone proved nothing, but evasiveness could hint at something more complicated. Cole located Darren's current address. The man who opened the door 3 decades later looked older, more settled, but his eyes still carried a slight flicker of uncertainty, as if he feared being misunderstood. Their exchange was brief. "You two were close?" Cole asked. A pause, not close, just worked together. Another pause, she was kind. Any disagreements, anything unusual near the end? Darren shook his head quickly. No, I didn't see her much outside work. The hesitations remained, thin spaces between his words, but no clear reason to suspect him surfaced. Still, Cole wrote his name on the list. Next was Marcy Elson, a close friend of Elara. She had been interviewed in 1993, offering a simple account. Elara had seemed calm, normal, nothing out of the ordinary. But now, when Cole visited her small home on the outskirts of town, Marcy appeared unsettled by the case's reopening. "It's been so long," she murmured. "I'm not sure what I even remember clearly anymore." Cole listened to the soft tremor in her voice, the way her eyes drifted away when he mentioned the note found in the envelope. "Did she mention anything about someone not following instructions?" he asked gently. Marcy's brow tightened. No, but she was distracted near the end, quiet in a different way. Different how? She took a breath, slow and unsteady, like she was carrying something she couldn't explain. Cole studied her carefully. Marcy's words felt sincere, yet incomplete, as though she was holding something back, not out of malice but out of uncertainty. He added her name to the list. Next came Eli Barrett, Elara's landlord at the time. Eli had been known for his meticulous nature, strict about rent, punctual with repairs, and observant in ways that made tenants uneasy. The original investigation had questioned him, but he had an alibi supported by two separate individuals. Now, decades later, he lived in a retirement home, his memory fragmented but certain details oddly sharp. She locked that door every night, Eli said, tapping the arm of his chair with slow, deliberate rhythm. Never left it open, never misplaced keys. Cole leaned slightly forward. You remember that clearly. Eli nodded once. Some habits don't fade, she was careful. The missing key resurfaced in Cole's thoughts, steady and persistent. If Elara had been careful, then its disappearance carried weight. He added Eli's name to the list, though the logic seemed thin. Another potential suspect emerged from an overlooked line in the original notes: Jonah Pierce, a local handyman who had done occasional maintenance at the library. The notes from 1993 claimed he had been cleared due to out-of-town travel that week. But the newly discovered receipt, dated the day before Elara was found, was from a hardware store Jonah frequently visited. Cole arranged a meeting. Jonah greeted him with a wary stare, his posture defensive but not aggressive. You were here on October 30th, 1993, Cole said quietly. Hardware store receipt, small latch. Jonah exhaled slowly. Yeah, I fixed a cabinet for a neighbor, nothing strange. Did you see Elara around that time? No, hardly knew her. The answer was firm, steady, not rehearsed, but Cole's instincts nudged him to keep Jonah on the list. The list grew to 5 names, then 7. Each one connected loosely to Elara, friends, co-workers, distant acquaintances, people whose lives had brushed against hers without any clear sign of conflict. None stood out sharply. None fit the narrative neatly. Cole reviewed the list in his office late one evening. The room was dim, the light from the desk lamp pooling like a small island in the darkness. Papers rustled softly as he moved them, the sound almost blending with the low hum of night air. He circled the names slowly, one by one. Each person had motive potential, misunderstandings, hidden tensions, quiet resentments, the sort of unseen emotional fractures that linger beneath ordinary interactions. Yet none carried a definitive reason. None had been placed near her home the night she was found. Cole leaned back, breathing steadily. The suspects formed a constellation without a center. He needed a point of gravity. And he suspected it lay not in the people themselves, but in the overlooked details they had collectively shared without knowing. 5 clues emerged slowly, linking inconsistencies to emotional conflicts. 1,000 words. Cole revisited the return box behind the library, a simple metal container, now replaced by a newer model but still occupying the same patch of concrete. The original had been stored for years in the evidence facility, rust creeping over its edges, its lock slightly bent from age rather than force. He examined the old box under bright inspection lights. The scuff mark noted in 1993 was still visible, though faint. A subtle indentation near the lock suggested that someone had attempted to open it without the key, not with force, but with practiced caution. He ran his thumb lightly over the indentation. Smooth, worn. Someone had used the wrong key repeatedly. Or someone had used the right key incorrectly. Elara's missing key whispered through his mind again. Returning to the note, check the last return. Someone didn't follow instructions. He wondered whether Elara had found something unexpected in the return box, something placed there by mistake or by intention. He reviewed her schedule again. Elara had been in charge of processing returns every Thursday. The night she disappeared was a Thursday. He traced the timeline. Return box opened at closing. Items sorted. One item noted as misfiled, but without explanation. That line, misfiled, had been dismissed by the original investigators as a clerical oversight. Cole narrowed his eyes. He scanned the library's archival logs. After cross-referencing dates, he found a single discrepancy. A book listed as returned but not scanned, and later marked missing. The title wasn't remarkable, a routine mystery novel, but inside the library's old system, the note return discrepancy had been typed and later deleted. Why delete it? Cole breathed steadily, letting the threads pull him forward. He began interviewing individuals with access to the return box in 1993. The first was Marcy. Her voice trembled subtly when he asked about the missing book. "I don't remember scanning it," she said softly, "but I might have. It was so long ago." Cole watched her face, eyes flickering briefly, not in guilt but in memory, as though she remembered something she didn't fully trust. Next he spoke with Darren, whose hands fidgeted during the conversation. "I wasn't working that shift," he insisted. "I didn't touch the return box that night." But when Cole asked about the missing book, Darren paused for a fraction of a second too long. The emotional inconsistencies felt deliberate, not overt, just small enough to matter. A pattern formed. Marcy's hesitation. Darren's evasiveness. Jonah's firm but narrow answers. Eli's insistence on Elara's careful nature. Each person carried an emotional weight, unspoken anxieties, small fractures in tone, fragments of memories that didn't align cleanly. Cole pieced them together slowly. Elara had discovered something in the return box, or perhaps been expecting something. The missing book might have contained something additional, something slipped inside by mistake or exchanged intentionally. And someone connected to the library had been involved. His thoughts returned to the photograph, the one from the newly discovered envelope. Elara near her mailbox, a faint tension in her eyes, a shadow in the background. Cole enlarged the photo again, studying every inch. The shadow was not a person, not a shape, just a distortion. But the angle suggested someone stood behind the photographer, someone close enough to be part of the moment. Someone she knew. Someone who had also known her routines. His breathing slowed. The clues were no longer random. They were forming a quiet emotional conflict, misunderstandings, fear, pressure, something subtle that had built silently over time. Someone had needed that book returned. Someone had used the wrong key. Someone had left a note about instructions not followed. Someone had watched her near the mailbox. Cole wrote one sentence at the top of a new page. The answer lies with the person who cared too much about something small. And with that single line, the path toward the twist began to sharpen. The breakthrough came not through a confession or dramatic discovery, but through a quiet rereading of a forgotten line, something Cole had always believed would matter one day. He returned to the earliest notes, to the small contradictions people offered unintentionally. And this time, A single detail shifted everything. It was Eli Barrett, the landlord. The man dismissed early in the original investigation. The man with a clean alibi. The man whose memory, even in old age, held a strange clarity about specific habits Elara supposedly kept. "You're sure she locked her door every night?" Cole had asked. "I know she did," Eli had insisted, tapping his chair arm. "She never forgot, not once." At first, the statement seemed harmless, an old man clinging to the precision of earlier days. But as Cole reviewed the evidence again, he realized something unsettling. Eli had described the lock on Elara's door in detail, too much detail. The lock had been replaced 1 week before Elara's final day. Elara herself had requested the change, citing general wear. The maintenance request form confirmed it, but that new detail would have been visible only to someone who had entered her home after the lock was changed. Eli had moved away soon after the case went cold, and when questioned back then, he never mentioned entering the house after the repair, nor had anyone mentioned letting him in. Yet, in the recent conversation, he had described the lock as if he had seen it up close. Cole leaned back slowly, letting the realization settle. Eli wasn't on the original suspect list because his alibi, 2 neighbors, placed him elsewhere on the night of the incident. But his alibi only covered the approximate time she was found, not the hours beforehand, not the day before, not the return box, not the misplaced book, not the missing key. Cole revisited the photograph of Elara near her mailbox, the faint distortion behind the photographer. He held the image against the timeline. Elara seen near her mailbox on October 28. Hardware store receipt dated October 30. Eli's history of doing small repairs around tenants' homes. A latch purchased not for a neighbor, but for something else entirely. Cole drove back to the retirement home that evening. The building was quiet, hallways lined with soft lights. He found Eli seated near a window, watching dusk settle across the lawn. The old man looked peaceful, hands folded on his lap. "Mr. Barrett," Cole said gently. Eli turned. "You're back. I have a few more questions." A brief nod. "Go on." Cole approached slowly, choosing words with the same precision he used sifting through evidence. "You said Elara always locked her door, that she never missed a night." Eli nodded again, expression calm. "But the lock was changed only a week before she was found," Cole continued. "A new model, new alignment. You would have noticed that only if you'd seen it after the repair." Eli's gaze shifted, not startled, just thoughtful, as if revisiting a memory long buried beneath careful layers. "I checked on things," he murmured after a moment. "Sometimes tenants forget to report issues." "Did you enter her home?" A small pause, barely a breath. "I might have," Eli said quietly. "It was a long time ago." Cole watched him closely. The calmness wasn't the calm of innocence. It was the calm of someone who had carried something for so many years that the weight had become familiar. "Elara carried a small key inside her work bag," Cole said. "It belonged to something personal." Another pause. "Yes," Eli whispered. The word barely reached the air. Cole lifted the photograph, the one from the envelope. "This picture," he said, "was taken only days before she was found. Someone was standing near the photographer, someone close, someone she knew." Eli's eyes softened. "She needed help," he said. "She didn't say it directly, but she was troubled. Something in the library returns. She found something that wasn't supposed to be there." Cole waited. Eli continued, voice low, steady, nearly emotionless. She asked me to install a latch on something she kept in her home, something she wanted secured. The missing book, Cole asked. A faint nod. She found something inside it, Eli said. Something small. She didn't understand why it was there. Cole felt the slow, inevitable tightening in his chest. Not alarm, not panic. Just the sensation of truth settling into place. What happened that night? Eli's gaze drifted toward the window again, watching the fading light. She came home upset, he said softly. She asked if I could help her find who returned the book. She thought it was misfiled on purpose. And she showed me the small item she found inside, a quiet breath. I told her it was nothing. She didn't believe me. Cole's voice remained steady. What was it? Eli paused for several seconds, long enough that the room seemed to grow still. A key, he finally said. Not hers, not mine. A key to something inside the library. Cole inhaled slowly. And she connected it to someone. She tried, Eli replied, but she misunderstood. She thought it meant something it didn't. She was frightened, thought someone was watching her. The shadow in the photograph. Cole realized the truth. Not a dramatic confrontation, not a moment of rage, but a quiet collapse of trust and fear. Elara confronted you, Cole said. Eli's silence was answer enough. She thought you were involved, Cole continued gently. She thought you were hiding something. Eli nodded once, the motion slow. She was scared, he whispered. I only wanted to calm her down. A long pause. She stepped back, lost her balance. It wasn't supposed to happen. Cole closed his eyes briefly. It had been an accident, at least in Eli's mind. An accidental fall, a moment of panic. But instead of calling for help, Eli had made a choice. A quiet, irreversible choice born not of cruelty, but of fear. Fear of blame. Fear of misinterpretation. Fear of how something small would appear. He had arranged the scene, taken the key, misled the investigation without ever intending to become a suspect. The true twist wasn't violence. It was fear, scaled into something irreversible. The least suspected person, a calm, meticulous elderly landlord who had never raised suspicion. The logic fit quietly, devastatingly. Cole stood slowly. Thank you for telling the truth, he said softly. Eli nodded, eyes distant. I should have said it then, he whispered. But the past had already sealed itself around the silence he kept. 7 ends with moral reflection. Truth isn't always visible on surface. 500 words. The case concluded without ceremony, documented with the same clinical thoroughness that had guided Cole's return to it. Eli was placed under supervision, his full statement recorded. The district attorney would determine the next steps, weighing intent, time, and circumstance. Justice, in its procedural way, would move forward. But the emotional weight remained unsolved. Cole returned one final time to the house where it all began. The door creaked the same way. Dust still drifted in thin layers across the floor. Nothing had changed except the knowledge he carried now, quiet, steady, heavy. He stood in the center of the room, near the faint outline that time had nearly erased. The silence felt different now. Not accusing, not mournful, just complete in a way truth sometimes is when finally uncovered. He closed his eyes. Elara Hastings had not been the victim of malice or conspiracy. She had been caught in the fragile space between fear and misunderstanding, a space where trust frayed and small decisions grew into irreversible outcomes. Cole opened his notebook and wrote a single line. Truth is not always sharp. Sometimes it is quiet, faint, hidden under years of dust. He looked around the room once more. The investigation was over. The answers had been found. Yet the feeling in his chest was not triumph, just a steady, human ache for the fragility of moments, the way a single misunderstanding can ripple outward for decades. Outside, the wind shifted gently through the trees. Justice would move forward, mechanical and necessary. But something human remained. Something unfinished. Something that would stay with him long after the case file was closed.